Welcome to Desert Wanderers, produced by Salt and Light Radio. If you're new here, we bridge the gap between you and the person in the pew next to you. I will be interviewing priests, religious, and laity in our local Boise diocese, asking questions that'll help you navigate your vocation and help build community wherever you are with whatever resources you may have. Let's build the city of God together. Welcome, Deacon Lou. How are you?
I'm unbelievable.
That's
I was always taught by that by another chef of mine. He always we get so used to saying, "How are you?" "I'm fine, good, thanks." No, we're not paying attention.
Right.
So he always says, anytime he's in the supermarket or anywhere, he says, "Somebody, how are you doing?" And I said, "I'm unbelievable." And then immediately perks you up and like, okay, good or bad. And you can usually tell by the look on my face whether it's good or bad. But usually it's good. It's always good, very blessed to be alive.
I do think that the connotation, or like the common use of the word unbelievable, is usually in the positive, though. So.
Usually. Yeah. But it gets people to pique their interest, and that's what you want to do. I've learned more about cashiers at grocery stores just by saying that word, because it starts a conversation and it gets them out of their rut, because they're in their rut just doing the scan and the numbers, doing how are you, fine, then be done. They don't even lift their eye. And I always make eye contact with them, because it's important to make eye contact because you're listening. I've learned little hospitality traits that you do in conversations, because we've lost such a social skill today with our phones that we're not paying attention. We're always doing something else when we really should be listening.
One of the things I did for Lent back when I was in college was I gave up like social media, only phone, like texting and calling is all I let myself do. And it was so funny because I was like, I'm going to meet so many people. I'm going to have so many new friends after this Lent. Literally everyone in line is just like scrolling.
I know.
Like, okay.
Makes you mad, doesn't it? But when you stop doing that, it makes you aware of
how much
you were really involved and detached from reality. And that's what phones are. I don't want to say they're evil, but they definitely are a distraction. And I'll go back and look at our trips. Like we went to Italy a couple years ago, and I went back and looked at the pictures, and it's amazing how many people are on their phones. I mean, you're in Venice or you're in Bologna or somewhere walking around, and everybody's got their phone. And I'm like looking at these beautiful churches, and it's just amazing how we've been so detached from the world. I mean, from the true beauty of the world, and it's in our phones now. So.
I think my mom always gets mad at me because she's like, you never take enough pictures of your kids. Like she does a big album at the end of the year for us, all of our kids. And so she's like, I have to just scrap and scrape all the pictures I can find of you and your kids, especially you and Aaron. Like my husband's name's Aaron. Anyways, and she's like, I can never get enough pictures. And I'm like, well, it's because I'm like trying to just enjoy the moment. And I'm not even saying I'm the best, because I do a lot of, I know that I have my own vices when it comes to social media and those kinds of things. So I might not be taking pictures, but I have other areas of which I'm watching YouTube or whatever that I spend too much time on my phone. So I'm not like saying anything about like being good about it. But I will say my mom, like when we're out doing stuff, I try to just be watching, and just being present, because it is true that when you have your phone in your pocket, it's easy to pull it out and to video something. But I mean, it's not a bad thing. Like it's cool to see.
It's not a bad thing. It just can't consume you. I mean, and I think that's where people have gone with their phones, is you almost have to pry it. It's like part of their body. They cannot get rid of their phone. They can't let it down. And I noticed that, I love reading books.
Yeah.
And I always have, like somebody will walk in my office at church. My office at church is wall-to-wall books. And I've collected, I love old books, history books. I've got old U.S. history books. I got everything. I like books. And I talk to so many people that say they read books on their phone now. And
I can't do that. That's one thing I can't do.
I cannot do it either. And, they make it to where you can flip the page and to make it look like it's crisp and you're turning a page in a book. And I cannot do it because you get interrupted constantly. It's the same with my prayer of reading liturgy, praying liturgy hours every morning and every night. You get an app on your phone's great, but you're in the middle of praying and all of a sudden you get a text or a whatever interruption by all the stuff, like my camera's at security cameras or whatever it is, you get interrupted all the time. So I have books, and I read books, and I put my phone away from me when I'm reading because I just don't like the interruptions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also just feel like with the Kindles, even, the ones that don't have the notifications and stuff, there's just something about, so I'm not a very good reader. I'm dyslexic. So if I'm reading a book, I want to be able to see like my progress. Like, oh, I went down that far. When the book's closed, you have your bookmark in, and you go, oh, I went down this far and I read this many pages, and there's like the visible. But when you're reading it on a Kindle, it's like you have the little percentage bar, but I feel like that's so less satisfying than just like reading an actual book.
No. Well, and you really lose. I mean, I don't know. There's something chemically going on there in your brain that makes you. It detaches you. I've run my own business for 31 years now, and it's funny because I worked for a large corporation, a restaurant corporation before that. So I worked for other people, obviously, for about 15 years before I bought the West Side Drive-In, which is just a 50s drive-in. But I made a list of everything that I liked about working for somebody else and what I did not like.
Yeah.
And I said, because my goal when I was 18, I had a very good goal-oriented mentor that taught me how to write down my goals, which, that kind of directed my life. I didn't realize how important goals were. Yeah. That you don't just let them float around in your head, and because they disappear. And he told me when I was 18, what are you going to do in life, Lou? And I said, well, I want to own my own restaurant, or I want to do this or whatever. And he goes, you need to write that down. You had an action plan and just put them on your fridge. So I wrote down, when I was 18, I wrote down 30 goals before I was 30. And it's amazing how real it is when you put it to paper, and it's not like you go up and look at the fridge every day of those goals.
Right.
And they're there though, and they're printed. Other than floating around your head, and then you're down 7 years down the road going, boy, I really wanted to do that, and it never happened. So I had that 30-30 goal thing, and I lost my train of thought where I was going with this. But
when you the good things about working for somebody.
Oh yeah, working for somebody else. Yeah. So I wrote stuff down. But anyway, I those goals. I accomplished every one of those 30 goals before I was 30, except one, and the last one I had was to own my own restaurant. And I bought the West Side when I was 31, so I missed it by a year.
Oh, my goodness.
But I had silly goals in there, and I'll get back to my point in a minute, but I had silly goals, and he told me, write down stupid stuff that, like, it's unattainable. So when I was 18, I wrote down that I wanted to get married when I was 24. So guess what happened? I got married when I was 24, and then I wrote down I want to have a boy first, and then a year later I want to have a girl. Well, guess what happened? A year after we were married, I had a boy. A year later, we had a girl. I mean, that's silly
Granted,
stuff.
that one's a little like by chance.
Yeah,
but.
yeah. Well, I know, but it was silly stuff, and I accomplished every one of them. So when I bought the West Side, I had that list of good things and bad things, and that was right on the cusp of the early 90s when computers started coming in. Mm-hmm. I remember I had my first Apple computer, a little tiny thing on my desk. It was, I don't remember what it was called, but it was just it was just an Apple computer. It was just a little tiny thing, and I thought it was just a wonderful thing. But we had processes and procedures that we had to do every week, like a labor worksheet that we wrote down. And everything became computerized. But to this day, 31 years later after I bought the West Side, we still handwrite our worksheets, because when you write it down, it's an imprint on your brain, just like those goals. And instead of having it on a computer like on a spreadsheet, which is fine, and you're just typing stuff in, you're not getting the same reaction in your brain as you would handwriting it. And it's amazing that people lose that.
Well, the memory thing is a huge thing, but even going back to just writing things down, when you're talking about that transfer of information, I don't know, this is like a hack that many people will talk about. If you can't sleep at night and your brain's just like going, they say get up and write down everything you're thinking about, and usually you can fall right back to sleep because your brain's trying to like file that somewhere, right? But they don't necessarily know where to file it. But when you write it down, there's some kind of like neurological release or safety net, like, oh, your brain's like, oh, you wrote it down. Mm-hmm. So like it's permanent somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and we've lost that.
Yeah.
We've lost that. I make all my managers, I don't really have managers, I have team leaders at our businesses. And I encourage our staff at church write it down. And we call them buddy pads. I had them buddy pads all through culinary school, and we had just a little notepad in the back of your pocket. Anytime you come up with an idea or you need to do something, write it down. And at the end of the day, you've got it recorded, because we go through life all day long. I need to do this. I need to do that.
Yeah.
And then you just forget about it. You forget about what you're doing, especially as you get older. You forget about stuff. So I write everything down, and it's either on a Post-it or whatever. I've got my buddy pad, and I go and I collect it all, and then I can throw the pieces of paper away when I've accomplished what I'm doing.
Well, that's the other thing I like about lists is, like, again, with, talking about the book, right? Getting to see your progress down the book. But the other thing that I really enjoy about lists is crossing them off. And
yes, I love that.
And be like accomplished. Like, you look at the list and it's all done, and you just throw it away, and you're like, the list is done.
Yep.
There's like this sense of accomplishment. Whereas, like, I mean, you can do the same thing on your cell phone if you wanted to do like lists or notes on your phone or whatever, but it doesn't feel as good as like scratching something off.
It does not. It does not feel at all. I cannot do it on my own. I don't have any. I know that stuff's on my phone or a calendar. I still have a hand calendar. Our staff meetings, I've got a calendar instead of on my phone. I mean, I have friends who use their phones for everything, like calendars. I can't do it. I have to physically have something in front of me and look with paper, and I can write on it and scribble and do whatever. And it's like my Bible. I mean, I brought my Bible today because, we're talking about stuff that we're in control of.
Right.
Right. And you come to realize as you go through life, we're not in control of anything. And I've got a lot going on in my life, and I look back and I go, how did I get through this day? And if you start every day in the morning with prayer, and really you got to make your life a prayer. I mean, that's basically it. And in so many years of my life were not like that I relied on myself. My ego is what drove me. I didn't have God in my life for a long time, and he turned me around to realize that you are nothing. And like Jesus says, without me, you can do nothing. Never really believed that until I got converted. And, I don't know if we want to talk about that at all, about how I came back to the church. I was a raised Catholic, altar boy, moved here in 1973 to Boise, grew up in Alabama. The reason we came out here is because in 1962, my dad was a pipe fitter, steam fitter, and he was out here in the desert between Mountain Home working on the underground Titan missile bases during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's actually a silo out in the desert out there that's still there. It's privately owned now, but there's a missile silo out there that used to have Titan missiles that never got completed. But we lived in I wasn't born yet, but we lived in Alabama, and I was called Oops because I was born 9 months to the day after my mom moved out here after they moved out here from Alabama. So family of 5, I became a family of 6. And we came back in 1973 because when I was weather in Alabama was terrible. I mean, every spring tornadoes.
Right.
And you're kind of playing the lottery with weather. So in 1973, I was out. I was 10 years old and out playing Pee Wee baseball, and a tornado came up. And I lived in Birmingham, and this tornado came up. That didn't touch the ground, but it flew right over us. And we thought it was a tornado. Then wind started whipping up, and we were out in their field playing baseball, and all the coaches threw the kids in the sewer ditch because we had these storm ditches. Yeah. Well, beautiful Lou got on his bicycle and tried to ride home in it. I lived about 4 blocks away. So I'm riding home, getting thrown. I felt like Dorothy, in Toto in the tornado. And I got home okay, and then I had a phobia after that. Every time I heard an airplane, we lived within about a mile of the Birmingham airport. Every time I heard an airplane, I thought it was a tornado, because that's exactly what it sounded like, this just massive, loud noise. So about 3 weeks later, tornadoes came through Birmingham again and just wiped out half the city. And my mom and dad said, Boise, remember Boise?
It doesn't have tornadoes.
They don't have tornadoes. So my dad just quit his job, and we were like the Clampetts and Beverly Hillbillies, and just got in the car and moved to Boise in 1973 with no job. So my dad traveled. He was a pipe fitter, so he was all over the Northwest. But that's what brought us to Boise. But I was, we were raised in an all-Catholic family. My dad actually was a Methodist, but he supported my mom, and we were all raised Catholic. And then went to St. Mary's when I came here, and then Went to Bishop Kelly, graduated in 1980, and when I graduated in 1980, I just left the church. I just walked away, like a lot of
Catholics
18 to
do,
20-year-olds. Yep, a lot of Catholics just leave. But and then I started living the life of the devil. My dad was an alcoholic. Alcoholism runs in our family, and I started cooking when I was 14 years old. I actually got a job as a dishwasher downtown Boise at the Wahi Plaza as a dishwasher, and alcohol is prevalent in the restaurant industry. And I started drinking when I was 14, 15 years old, and it just consumed me. That's what I was. So all through the 1980s, I just became an alcoholic. I don't think there was one day for 12 years that I did not drink, every single day. And in the meantime, I met my wife in 1987. She was a hostess at a restaurant I was working at. And for 5 years, I was a drunk from 1987, when we got married. And we had 2 kids. Like I said previously, we had 2 small kids. And then 1993 is when I quit drinking. And that's a story in itself, because all through the 80s, I never stopped believing in God, and I remember going to bed every single night saying, Lord, please let me stop drinking. Because it was in my brain. But the next morning, the first thing I would do was to start drinking. I mean, I would start drinking at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And it would just all throughout the day. And I would have to continue drinking at night when I got home. And to hide it from my wife, I had a stash out in the garage, and we had a fridge out in the garage, and there was a cubby hole behind the fridge. And it was about a 1 by 2 foot, just the size of the fridge, but it was, it was deep.
Yeah.
And I would go out at night, and I could chug a beer in like 5 seconds. And I'd chug a beer and throw the can behind the fridge. And that's what kept me going throughout the night, because my wife didn't have any idea. I mean, if you can walk outside to the garage, chug a beer in 5, 10 seconds, walk right back in, she didn't know.
Right. Especially with 2 small children, you're not.
Oh, no. She was very busy. She was very busy. But I knew I was headed in the wrong path. I mean, I knew I was, and I kept praying that prayer every day, but it was like God wasn't answering me. So then on April 26, 1993, I'm drunk from home. I was a chef at a restaurant here in Boise, and I've been drinking all day. I come home, and my wife had found the stash. The cubby hole had filled up, and all the beer cans, 400 or 500 beer cans, were behind that fridge. And, as you keep throwing them, it fills up. I never emptied it.
Yeah.
And I could walk in the door, and she says, what are all those beer cans doing behind the fridge? And it was like
She had no idea.
She had no idea. She had no idea. And there's this saying about enablers. All alcoholics have enablers. And I don't want to say my wife was an enabler, because she really wasn't. She was just like you said, very busy with 2 small kids, and I hid it very well. I mean, I was a happy drunk, and I didn't, I could hide it well. I mean, I had a good talent as cooking, and that's how I aspired to be a great chef and own my own restaurant. But I drank my way. I had a good talent, so I could hide it a lot. And so I hid it. And she said, what are the beer cans doing behind the fridge? And that's when the Holy Spirit just took me over, and that's when God answered my prayer. I just looked at her and I said, I'm an alcoholic. And she was shocked. She was like, no, you're not. So I just sat her down, and I said, this is what I've been doing. And I went to the fact that telling her that I started drinking at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd start having, my saying was I'd have a 7 and 7 and 7. And then by noon, had graduated to Long Island iced teas. I would drink a case of beer a day. I mean, I was bad every single day, and she had no idea. And she really didn't believe me at first. She's like, this is not you. And I said, but I'm done. I said, I'm going to quit drinking. So when you're drinking that much, you're going to have withdrawals and shakes, and you have to start thinking about AA and all this stuff. So our life got completely turned upside down. But it's funny how God just took me and said, you're done. And, we talk about vices and how hard it is for us to get out of bad habits. And, the thing about having bad habits is you say, I want to stop that habit. And then a month or 2 later, or a week or 2 later, that bad habit pops back in your brain. Yeah. I like C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce. He talks about the red lizard on your shoulder, and it's the devil telling you, whispering in your ear, oh, it's okay, you can do it. So our vices are so hard to break because we don't put our fully trust in God. We have that ego that takes over and says, oh, I can do it one more time, or whatever the sin is, and we go back to that vice because the vice was fun, right? It was fun. So drinking was fun to me. And for some reason, God took all of that away from me. I mean, he completely took everything away.
Wow.
I never had shakes. I never had withdrawals. It was nothing. It was like a light switch just turned off and I was done. So I haven't had a drink in 30, coming up on 32 years since I've had a drink. And I don't even think about it anymore. And I look back at it like how lucky and how blessed I was for God to do that, because he totally took me out of a situation where I probably would have been homeless, divorced, or dead. I mean, I was on the path to death. And he obviously said, okay, I'm going to answer your prayer, and it's taken away. And that was when we started. I had two small kids. I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And my wife had been raised in no religion. Her family was Seventh-day Adventist, and they didn't really practice their faith. And I hadn't practiced my faith in 13 years. I mean, I left in 1980, so it was 1993. And she says, we need to start going to church. You know, these kids need
Some kind of foundation.
Some foundation, right? And I went, okay, whatever. I didn't know there was any difference between the churches. I was like, that's fine. So I was catering a lot. So I was catering at churches. So I always enjoyed going to these different churches, and I never went to a service, but I would do catering in these churches, like for functions and stuff. So we talked about going to church for 3 years.
Yeah.
It's another one of those things where I prayed for so long for God to have me stop drinking. Well, I remember writing down my goals to go back to church, because I was a goal guy. So I'd write down goals. Like when I bought the West Side 94, I wrote down goals. I mean, just goals. I'm a goal guy. So I remember writing that down, going to church, and that was just sitting there and never did anything about it. Well, on November 4th, 1996, the Holy Spirit came with fire, and he burned our house down.
Actual fire.
Actual fire. We lost everything.
Wow.
And that was the turning point in our lives. My wife, we had a wood burning stove, and hadn't had a fire in over a week. And we had a little gravel pit outside the house, which was detached from the house, that we used to take even after a week, we would take the ashes out and just put them out in the gravel pit to make sure they were out.
Yeah.
Well, my daughter, 6-year-old daughter, was homesick that day, and my wife, and we hadn't had a fire in over a week. Like I said, she had taken the ashes, put them in a grocery bag, and taken them out. And she was on her way out of the garage, and my daughter started screaming in the house. So she put the bag down 6 feet away from the garage door, and was just sitting on concrete 6 feet away from the garage door. And she went back in the house and forgot that she'd put them out there. And 6 hours later, caught the house on fire.
Wait, how?
I know. We don't know how. We don't know how. I mean, isn't that nuts? The bag caught on. I mean, after a week, the coals were still there. The embers were still. Yeah, it caught the bag on fire, caught the garage door on fire, and burned the house down.
That's insane.
I wasn't at home at the time. I got called from work that your house is on fire, so I came home and saw it all. The fireman said that they had about 2 or 3 minutes to get out of the house. My 8-year-old son had actually seen from his. They were smelling smoke in the house, and my son was in his bedroom and had seen flames said, Mom, there's flames on the garage, outside the garage. And the fireman said they had like 2 minutes to get out of the house. It was going to explode from a backdraft from opening up the doors.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So the whole thing was inspired. So, but the next 6 months were hell on earth for us, because of the nightmares my kids had with the fire. We lost our pets. The pets died in the fire. We lost everything. And, we were able to salvage some stuff, but most of it was smoke damaged and just burnt. And we were in 6 months of rental apartments while our house was getting rebuilt. It was just not good. And about 3 months in, my wife said, and we had a lot of fights. It's really, because my wife had guilt for the fire, and, I didn't hold anything against her, but it was just you look back, it was like the worst time of our life to go through. Yeah. But it was also the best time, because she said, we got to go to church. We need some direction in our life. We didn't have any direction. When I look back at it now, how materialistic we were. Had to keep up with the Joneses. We had to have all the new toys. We had to have all this new stuff. And when you lose it all, and you still have your family, you realize that's what's important. This material stuff is not important. I mean, it can be replaced or whatever, but we lost some very valuable stuff. My wife lost her wedding dress, and I lost old stuff, but still, it's just material stuff. And you realize you still had your family, because I could have easily lost my family that night. Yeah. And I said, okay, we're going to go to church. So, like I said, I didn't know there was any difference between the churches. I thought they were all the same. So where'd we go? We go to the Baptist church. And my wife was, like I said, she was not raised in any faith, so she didn't know. She'd never even been in a Catholic church. So, and I didn't think there was any big deal. So I go to the Baptist church, and we're in this church, and I'm like, what is this? Being raised Catholic.
Where are we supposed to kneel at
Yeah,
some point
I'm
in
like,
this?
what is going on? I mean, they had sort of an altar in the front, and they had the karaoke screen, TV screens up on the wall, and we're singing, and they're raising their hands, praying and singing, praise and worship, I guess. And the pastor got up and gave a 45-minute sermon, and then we did some more karaoke songs, and then he said, anybody wants to receive Jesus in their heart, come on up here. The altar call, right? And I thought, boy, this is foreign to me. This is like, I was like, it was more like going to like, just a conference.
Concert,
Right. Yeah. So we went there a couple times, and I told my wife, I said, this isn't what I'm used to. I'm not comfortable with this. And she said, okay. And then Our Lady of the Rosary was getting built, hadn't even been built yet. And we lived 2 minutes away from Our Lady of the Rosary, and they were actually having mass in the parish hall. And my wife's sister was Baptist, and she said, well, why don't you just go to where Luce was raised? So my wife says, okay, well, let's go try it out. So we walked into this parish hall and went to mass. And of course, I felt like I'm at home already. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm used to, right? And my wife, as we're walking out of the church, she says, boy, that made me feel like I was at home. And I thought,
Really?
oh, that's good. And then so she, not being raised in any faith, we started going to mass. And of course, I was not receiving communion, so I didn't really know what communion was all about.
Yeah.
But there was a hunger starting to develop in me over the course of months. Like, what am I everybody's going to have to receive communion. So the problem with going to a church that's Catholic, and her parents were Seventh-day Adventists, and her sister's a devout Baptist, there were some issues that came up. They started drilling me with questions. I had no idea what the answer. I mean, they were really drilling me, like, why do you call your priest father? The Pope is the Antichrist. The Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. All this, I had never even heard of that stuff. And I thought, why do you pray to saints? Why do you pray to statues? And all this stuff. I was like, whatever. I don't know the answer to that. So, but during the course of this going to mass, my wife kept saying, I like coming here, but I'm not becoming Catholic. I said, well, it's fine, whatever. I'm not pressuring you to do anything. And so I called my sister and I said, hey, I'm getting drilled by these Protestants about the Catholic Church, and I don't have any answer. She goes, were you reading the Bible? And I said, well, no. And she goes, well, why don't you start reading the Bible? So I said, well, I need to go buy a Bible first.
So was your family still practicing? Were you the only one that left?
No, I'm not. Almost all of my brothers, I have 4 brothers and a sister. My sister never left. My sister and my mom, very devout. Most of my brothers continued going, but we all left at some point. And, I still have a couple brothers that aren't going to church right now.
Okay.
But I left the longest. I mean, I could say that I left. I mean, I really left. 17 years I left.
Yeah.
But I could see there was a hunger developing in her. And then the day before RCIA started, she says, hey, I want to go to RCIA. I went,
Your wife?
My wife said
Yeah?
that. And I said,
Wow.
really? I said, okay. I said, well, I'll go with you. Because I didn't really know. I didn't even know what RCA stood for. So, but I had to buy a Bible. So I went to Barnes & Noble and bought this nice big blue Bible. And I called my mom. They lived in Georgia then. And I said, hey, Mom, I bought a Bible. And she said, well, that's great. What did you buy? And I opened it up, and it says Authorized King James Version. And she said, you bought a Protestant Bible. I went, what's the difference? What's the difference between the Bible? I didn't know there was a difference. And that was really the turning point for me. I was like, okay, I need to get my stuff together and start doing this. So I still have that blue King James Bible. Looks brand new.
Hey, the King James, the language there, a lot of people really enjoy it just because it's fun.
It is the thous and the those and the henceforth and all that. But the Douay Rheims has the same thing. The Douay Rheims Bible is the same. That's a Catholic version, but I still have that Bible, but I went and bought this Bible. And as you can look through this Bible, every single page has writing on it now. And we go back to handwriting and stuff, but I go back and look at stuff, and I became a Bible junkie. I'm not a Bible scholar by any means. I love the Bible. I read the Bible every day. The Bible kind of rules my life. there's always something in there to learn. And even through the prayers and my morning, afternoon, and evening prayers, there's Bible all around. And, Catholics have a problem with, and I go back to Scott Hahn. He did a tape in the early 90s, and I don't remember the name of it, but he basically saying that Catholics, you rely too much on the church. You don't rely on the Bible. And he said it's the Bible and the church. It's both of those, or it's neither. You can't just come and go through the motions at Mass without realizing it's very scriptural. And the Bible came out of the church. We tend to think that the church came out of the Bible, and a lot of Protestant denominations, they're Bible based.
Yeah.
Well, I learned that the Bible is the Catholic. It's our playbook.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really our playbook. And then I started realizing, I started getting challenged on all these questions. Like I was saying, why do you call your priest father? Why do you pray to saints? Why do you do all this stuff? It's all in the Bible. It's all there. And it all validated everything that I was believing, even to the simple thing of making the sign of the cross.
Yep.
When I first came back, that was one of the first questions. You guys do this superstitious thing, make the sign of the cross. Why do you make the sign of the cross? And I'd ask Catholics, why do we make the sign of the cross? And, I'd get the answer of,
I don't know.
Baseball players do it, football players do it when they make a touchdown. I mean, all these, meaningless ritual things. And I thought that can't be why we make the sign of the cross, And we tend to go through the motions. And when we go through liturgy, we celebrate liturgy, right? We go to Mass every week, and we go through the motions. We don't think about what we're saying. So when you start reading the Scriptures and you realize how profound what's going on at Mass, it'll change your life. It'll transform your life, So we going back to the conversion story, went through RCIA 9 months, my wife all the way up until the scrutinies, which were in March, right before Easter, the three weeks before. Before Easter, I think the three scrutinies. She's like, I'm not becoming Catholic. And then, lo and behold, Easter Vigil comes, and my wife gets baptized and confirmed. My kids get baptized, and my son gets confirmed, and we got our marriage blessed. We had the whole grand slam done on Easter Vigil 1998.
Amazing.
When she was all the way up until the 2 months before, she was not becoming Catholic. Well, that caused quite a rift in our family.
Which it does.
Yeah. So. But after all these years, the rift's gone away. But the Bible became such a part of my life. I take this Bible everywhere. My goal in life is to see every Catholic walk into church with a Bible, because it makes Mass come alive. It's just like our. I'll just give you one example. We had the reading from Isaiah 6. It was a couple of weeks ago. We had Isaiah 6. We had Paul's conversion story, and we had Peter's call, all in the same Mass. And Isaiah 6 always stuck with me, and it's how parts of the Mass all of the Mass is scriptural, from the beginning to the end. And right when we walk in the door and we say, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, what is that? Why I had to go back and learn why that is. And I would challenge every Catholic to go through Mass and pick a line from Mass and go find out where it came from. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. All earth is filled with his glory. We say that every Mass. Are we thinking about what we're saying?
Right.
Well, when I say holy, 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 the Lord of hosts, I go back to Isaiah 6. Isaiah 6 recognizes he's in the presence of God in the temple, and he sees the seraphim come down, and he says, well, he recognizes he's in the presence of God. Well, when we're saying holy, 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 it goes right into the Eucharistic prayer. We're in the presence of God. And do we realize that at the tabernacle? We should show the fear of the Lord there. And we don't. We just go through the motions. And as Catholics, we need to learn what we're doing at Mass. Mass is an ancient ritual. It's 2,000 years old. And if you really look at it, it goes back a lot further than that, because we're actually doing Jewish liturgy. I found that out in the book of Sirach. Go to read Sirach chapter 50, written 300-400 years before Christ, and you'll see the Mass in Sirach chapter 50. It describes what we do at Mass. And I brought a Jewish friend of mine to Mass one time. He was blown away. We walk out of Mass and he goes, "That's just like synagogue." I said, "What do you mean that's just like synagogue?" He said, "Up until the communion part, That's what we do at synagogue. We do the same thing. They do an Old Testament reading, they do a psalm. I mean, that's where the structure of the Mass came from Jewish worship. And Jesus Christ fulfilled it in the Lord's Supper. And that's, the Mass used to be called the Lord's Supper. That's what it was called, or the sacrifice. So study as a Catholic, study what you're doing. It makes you much more fulfilled as a Catholic than just going through the motions. Because when we go through the motions, what are we doing? What is liturgy? I ask this all the time to Catholics, saying I teach RCIA or I teach a class, and I'll say, what is liturgy? And they're going, well, it's what we do at Mass. I said, well, what's the word come from? And they're like, I don't know. And it comes from a Greek word, liturgio, and liturgio means public worship, and it means public works. So when I break it down to how does a city operate? The city operates by public works, right? Power, electricity, gas, water, sewer, and trash. If we didn't have that, how would we survive as a city? We would not survive. We would be toast. Look at when our electricity goes out for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We're like, our life stops. So liturgo, public works, that's us. We're the church, right? So when we go in, it's not just the priest up there or the deacon. It's not. Right. That's not what it's about. I mean, public works is our community together in union with the priest, offering ourselves as what? As Paul in Romans chapter 12, what does he say? He says, I urge you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God for your spiritual worship. What does that mean? Well, Jesus just said it last week. He tells the apostles last week, he says, I'm going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they're going to kill me, and I'm going to raise after 3 days. And what does he say right after? He says, you must deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. Those who lose their life for my sake shall find it. So that's all about what the Mass is when we go into Mass, we are offering our bodies as a living sacrifice in union with what's going on at that altar. It's a heavenly vision. If you read Revelation, read any of the scriptures, everything points to Christ, and that's how you get more involved as a Catholic, and it starts taking over your talk and your daily talk with other people. You have an opportunity every moment of your life to bring people to God, and we don't realize that. It's because we're very selfish people. And it's like Fulton Sheen said, he goes, when you become a Christian, you lose your ego, because our ego is who we are, right? Our who we think we are, our identity, right? Ego is identity. Well, he says, when you become a Christian, and he was specifically talking about priests when I heard this talk, but you can apply it as a Christian. Yeah. You take on the ego of Christ. You take on Christ. So we're supposed to be little Christ. Do we really act that way? But if you go, you don't just come to Mass for an hour a week. There's 168 hours in a week. What are you doing the rest of the 167 hours? Exactly. You don't just, had a priest at BK one time ask us, what's the most important part of the church? And a girl raised her hand. She said, the exit door. And everybody laughed, it's like on the way out. And he says, you're right. That's exactly the right answer. It's because what you learn in here, you take out and go out into the world. That's where we get the word Mass, right? Ita missa es. That's the dismissal by the deacon. Go forth, glorifying the Lord by your lives, or go forth, the Mass is ended. You are what you learn in church for that 1 hour or whatever it is in the religious ed class or whatever you learn, you need to go and share it with other people. And we've become such a closed society. It's just very individualistic. And that individualistic notion, like, that rugged individualism, like it's all about me, that's an unknown concept 500 years ago. Yeah. It's the Bible. If you read the Bible, it's all familial. It's a familial thing. It's all about covenants and how we live our lives in unity with each other. It's not this me, the WIIFM, what's in it for me channel. And we go to that a lot, and that's not the Bible. And you run in conflict when you start living your life as such an individual and not realizing that you're, just read the scriptures, we're the hands and feet of Christ, right? He's the head of the body. You read the scriptures and it makes sense when you look at it as a whole communion, koinonia, communion, and that's what the Eucharist is all about. So when we see the vision of Isaiah getting called, we're getting called every day of our lives. I can't remember the name of the priest who wrote it, but he wrote a book called The Sacrament. of the present moment. And
Oh,
he
wow.
breaks it down. It's a real simple book. It's only probably 80, 90 pages. He breaks it down saying that every moment of your life is a sacrament. If you wake up in the morning and realize that we're never going to get that moment back, it's gone, and you have an opportunity every single minute of every single day to bring God to other people. And we don't realize how important that is, how we can
Right.
change our lives by words. Words mean things. John 1:1, the Word was with God, the Word became God, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What does that mean? Well, Jesus is the Word, right? Yeah. So we as we go through our lives, we always have to have that as a foundation in our lives, that the Holy Spirit is within us. And I don't take stock in that. We just don't take stock in that at all.
So where do you think, like where you're at now, I would kind of I know that you're involved with some parish ministry, so we could talk about that. But when you talk about this aspect of Christians or Catholics specifically taking their faith out into the street, what has been some kind of monumental or maybe epiphany moments that you've had throughout your journey to get to that point, to like share, to actively sharing your faith? Was there a time where you were not like wanting, kind of more reserved, and then what kind of took you to the step of like really sharing that, and then how do you do that today?
Well, I definitely, you're very correct. In 1998, when we had the Grand Slam and became Catholic again, I would have laughed you off the stage saying that you're going in 15 years you're going to be a deacon, and you're going to be taking, even within 2 years of that, you're going to be teaching RCA. I was never going to do that stuff. I was a chef running a restaurant, and I was like, yeah, this is good. This little church gig on the side is fine. Going to church and realizing that God's there. But you got to realize the call. You got to realize, just going back to Isaiah 6 again, Isaiah says, woe to me, I am doomed because I'm a man of unclean lips among a people of unclean lips. Yeah. And what does it do? The seraphim comes down with a coal, puts it on your lips, and what coals do? They burn your lips. It hurts, right? Yeah. And then immediately after that, the angel said, see, your wickedness is removed, your sin is purged. You're clean. You've been made clean by that coal. And what is God then speaks and says, well, who am I going to send? And what does Isaiah say? He immediately says, send me. Raise his hand, send me. I will go, send me. And that's basically what happened to me is after I came back to the church, reading the scriptures and realizing that God has a purpose, and he has a purpose for you. It's a purpose for every one of us. And that's part of going back to what I'm saying. What you learn is you need to share with other people. I think the biggest thing is that I got turned on to the saints and started reading the saints' lives and how they just put it all out. Most of the saints are martyrs, and martyr means witness. Or what kind of witness is Lou going to be? And I'll never forget, in the year 2000, I hired this 6'6" huge guy from my catering company. Very devout Baptist. He was a Southern Baptist. And first day he walks in, he knew I was Catholic. And he walked into my kitchen. He goes, listen, pal, I'm working for you, but you don't bring any of that Catholic stuff up to me. I went, no problem. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And very charismatic guy. He went to this church where they prayed in tongues. And he was very, there was just something about him. There was an aura about him. And I thought, man, you don't just have to be Catholic, right? So I was open. I had so many different people working for me. I had a Wiccan working for me. I've had all kinds of different people. And once you realize that God put those people there for a reason, it's not like they just did happenstance. Yeah, they showed up for a reason. God put them in your life for a reason. So this guy, I was just praying like, okay, I'm not going to ever bring up the Catholic Church or anything. So he kept coming and trying to proselytize me with his Baptist faith, and I was very accepting or whatever. And he goes, yeah, we're studying the Gospel of John right now at our church. I went, oh, good. I said, when you get to John chapter 6, will you let me know? And he said, sure. So the week before he comes, he goes, hey, chef, we're on John chapter 6. And what were those questions? So I wrote down this list of questions because John chapter 6 is like the Catholic chapter. Yeah. So wrote down all these questions for him. He came back Wednesday morning. It was a Bible study on Tuesday night. He comes back Wednesday morning. And I said, how'd Bible study? He goes, well, not too good. I went, well, what happened? He goes, well, I asked my pastor all these questions. He didn't have the answers. He didn't answer me. Because because I was very specific about what did
What were
Jesus
some of
mean
the
when he says you
questions?
must eat my flesh and
Oh.
drink my blood, and what does the word eat mean? Because I knew from my study, when Jesus says you must eat my flesh and drink my blood, that word eat is a Greek word called trogon. And you go back and look at what the real meaning of trogon means. It means to chew and gnaw like you're chewing on a raw animal.
Okay, sorry. It's so side note, but I remember listening to Catholic Answers, and they were talking about when you receive the Eucharist, if you should chew it or just let it dissolve on your tongue. Someone asked this question, and that's what they said. They went back to the room. They're like, yeah, you're supposed to
chew.
You're actually use your muscles.
Right. Because Protestant use chapter 6 as symbolism, metaphorically. It's not really real metaphor. Jesus speaking, and symbolically. But
so did you write that question
Yeah,
down?
I said, why would 5,000 people leave if he was talking in symbol?
Yeah.
And the press didn't have an answer. You don't have an answer. I mean, these are his followers.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got 5,000. I mean, he just fed 5,000 people. So there's probably 20,000 people in the area. And he turns around and says, you must eat my flesh. And he didn't just say it once. He says it 3 times. You must eat my flesh and drink my blood. So questions upon that. So that was the first thing I thought, okay, there's a little spark in this guy, right? So then a couple of months later, he starts having conversations with me. And then he comes to the week before Palm Sunday, he comes up to me and goes, Chef, I need to go to Mass. I went, what? What are you talking about? You need to go to Mass. And he says, I woke up, I turned on the TV at 5 o'clock in the morning, and Mass was on TV. And I just was captivated by it, so I need to go to Mass. So okay, we come to Mass with me. So he comes to the first Catholic Mass. He comes to Palm Sunday Mass, which is like it's like the bells and whistles. Yeah. So we walk out of there, and he looked at me and he goes, "That's what worship is."
Whoa!
That's what he says to me. I went, "Wow, okay."
I've actually taken my friend that was Baptist to church, and he was like, what is this?
Well, I've done that too. They're like, I've had some Baptists come to Mass, and they're like, this is all, pagan worship.
Yeah, exactly.
They had no idea. So I always prep them beforehand, and I prepped him beforehand of what, this is Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. I explain stuff.
Especially for Palm Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I would explain to him parts of the Mass and what it's all about. And because he loved the Bible, so I would just take parts of the Mass and say, go read this, or go read this part, and he would understand it. Yeah. So lo and behold, he's in RCIA, becomes Catholic 9 months later. For a guy that walked into me and tells me,
I'm not gonna
don't you bring up that Catholic stuff to me. And then he was on the verge of becoming a priest. He wanted to become a priest. He started studying the priesthood. Whoa. And unfortunately had a heart attack and died 3 years later. I mean, but great guy. But that's an example of how God uses you. I mean, this guy just was a catering cook that comes in, and he becomes a very holy. I could already tell he had a sense of holiness about him, and he found home. And that's happened all through and I'll tell you a story about this guy. Padre Pio is one of my favorite saints.
Yes.
Love Padre Pio. His prayer, pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer. That's what his saying. And I pray that a lot. I mean, that's been in my brain forever. Just because my sister-in-law had a devotion to Padre Pio, so when we came back to the church, she bought me all his Padre Pio books. So from 1998 to 2000, I was like consumed by Padre Pio, just who he was and the stigmata and just everything. And that was his prayer, pray, hope, and don't worry. Because we all say we pray and we all say we hope, but we worry a lot. We worry about a lot of things, and we get consumed by worry and anxiety and fear. So that prayer always stuck with me. Pray, hope, and don't worry. God is merciful and will hear your prayer.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. You realize the longer you're on this earth, the more you realize that you have no control.
No, zero control. And we can get into that too, about how God, I could go back through my life. We can all go back through our life to these turning points in our lives. Like God had his hand right all the way through your life. God has had his hand in everything you've done. And my wife in 2002, had to have an emergency hysterectomy. She was my catering director, and she collapsed and found out she had all these cysts, and it was really bad, and it was not good. And I was freaking out. And they gave us like 1 day notice, said, you got to go into surgery tomorrow. Wow. And owning your own business, you can't just drop what you're doing, right? So her surgery was scheduled for like noon the next day, and I had to go to work in the morning for a couple hours before I took her to the hospital. And I walked in, and everybody knew I was scared to death. I mean, I was worried and anxiety and fear. All that prayer I just said was out of the picture on my brain. I was like freaking out about my wife. And George was his name, the tall Baptist guy. And this is in the middle. This is kind of in the middle of where his journey was. I mean, he had, been open. I don't remember if he had started going to mass or not yet, but he was on his way. And he walks up to me that morning and hands me a piece of paper. And he said, here. And so I open it up and it says, pray, hope, and don't worry. God will hear your prayer. And I said, where did you get this? And he goes, some guy woke me up at 4:00 in the morning and told me to write it down and give it to you. I went, what? He goes, no, really. This guy told me to write that down and give it to you at 4:00 in the morning. I said, what guy? He goes, I don't know who it was. So I knew exactly who it was. And I went, George, I said, that's one of my favorite prayers. And it wasn't even in his handwriting. I said, did you write this? He goes, yeah, I wrote it. I said, that's not your handwriting. He goes, well, I don't know, Chef. I said, the guy just told me to, and that's the gift that George had. I mean, he could,
wow.
And he, and I still I lost that one, but I've got it in here in my Bible, if I could find it real quick. Yeah. So this is kind of the same thing. George wrote this other note to me. Anyway, so I knew after that day, my wife was going to be fine. It's like Padre Pio's telling through George that it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And everything went fine. Everything was good. And so God sent you these little reminders. And it was it was a miracle in my brain. Like, how did God talk to this guy? But God talks through us all the time. It doesn't have to be written down. So I was struggling real bad. One day with where I was going. I was relying too much on myself, and I wasn't turning my life over to God enough. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was letting everything bug me and just not being good. So the gospel reading was on Bartimaeus that day, and blind Bartimaeus, and I'm sitting in we have full church at Mass, and George always sat by himself on the other side of the church. And this is like 2 minutes before Mass starts. George comes running across the church and hands me this piece of paper. And I open it up, and it says, are you going to be like Bartimaeus today, or are you going to home empty-handed today? And it stuck with me. I was like, what is this about? And again, the same thing after Mass. I said, George, what? Because this isn't his handwriting. I said, George, what's going on? He goes, same thing, Chef. Guy told me to write it up and give it to you this morning. It was just nuts. So I realized that I was Bartimaeus.
Yeah.
That was me, and I wasn't Lord, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. I was like being it all myself and not turning and Bartimaeus left, blind, and he was able to see. Took the scales off, and that's exactly what I needed, and it totally changed my direction. So George was a very special individual. It was very strange. He came to me one day and said, Chef, why don't everybody ever sit next to me? Because it would be weird, because he would sit in a pew and the whole pew would be empty. Really? And I started asking people, and so I started sitting next to him. I said, George, I'll sit next to you. So me and my wife would sit next to George. And it reminded me of Pope John Paul II, because I remember Scott Hahn talking about once that he was present at one of John Paul's private masses in the chapel in the Vatican. And he walked into the chapel, and the Pope wasn't there. And it was like, where's the Pope at? And he started hearing this grunting and this groaning, and realized that Pope John Paul was prostrate in front of the altar in the front pew praying. And the Holy Spirit, and you read that in the scriptures, the Holy Spirit groans.
Yeah.
And that's how George prayed. I could hear him groaning and grunting. So I was like, man, this guy is something else. I was like, that holy thing about him. And that's why people wouldn't stay next to me, because he would almost scare them by his praying. So he would always be in the pew by himself. But that guy had a special gift. And, even to this day, he died in 2007, 2008. I can smell him. I'll be in my kitchen and I can smell him. It's just weird. He has a certain smell to him. And it's like, there you are, George. I can just feel them. It's just amazing. And you just recognize the presence of God and recognize that the saints are alive and well, and they're there to help you. So all through your life, there's reasons for everything. Even the people you hate, the people you don't, I don't say hate in a literal sense that you don't get along with, God puts them in your life for a purpose.
Yeah.
I could go on and tell you stories about people that God has thrown into my life. In 2015, I got, we were talking about control. I've been a chef. In 2015, I would have been a chef for 35 years. In 1980 was my first chef's job. So I was a young, talented chef, 18 years old, and I opened up my own first restaurant then. But so 35 years I'm a chef and thinking I know everything about cooking. And 2015, I've been very lucky and blessed to be able to meet some key people, and God to put people in my life. So Guy Fieri with the Food Network was one of them.
Right.
He came in 2009 and did our restaurant. So I kept a relationship with him. So in October of 2015, I went and did Guy's Grocery Games in Santa Rosa and lost at the first round. But I was having this abdominal pain, and it was painful. So fly back from San Francisco, go to the doctor, and I said, I'm having this abdominal pain. And my doctor says, she says, well, you better have a CAT scan. And I said, I never had a CAT scan in my life. So I go get a CAT scan. She calls me 2 days later and says, well, you have lymphoma. I went, what? I didn't even know what lymphoma was.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean lymphoma? She goes, well, it's cancer. I went, no way, I don't have cancer. Nobody in my family's had cancer. And I thought, okay, when she goes, well, we need to have a biopsy and double check. So they have a biopsy, comes back, I have an incurable form of cancer. And it totally changed my world, being normal and being fine, everything going through life, and all of a sudden you get told that you have incurable cancer. So, of course,
Right.
I'm a research guru, so I get on the internet and I start looking at this cancer I've got, and the prognosis was 7 years. 7 years, you're gone.
What year was this?
In 2015.
Okay.
And I thought, and I remember slamming my keyboard down on my computer and going, what is this, God? You giving me 7 years to live? What does that mean? So then I just started researching and then realizing that I had not been treating my body correctly at all. Stress is a big monster
Right.
that we all deal with.
Right.
But I had not been eating right. I've been a chef for 35 years. You think you know everything about food, right? Well, I'll tell you, from 2015 until today, I've learned more about food than I had the previous 35 years. About what food is, and especially being a Catholic and being a Bible junkie, I started realizing all the food in the Bible. Those guys weren't idiots back then.
Yes.
And that's why I do this weekly cooking with scripture segment, because they were smart and realized that wholesome, natural foods are good for your body.
Yes.
And so I totally changed my diet and started living the right way, right?
What kind of things? Go into that a little bit more. So what kind of things did you
Well,
change specifically?
Well, we eat so much processed food.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think about it. So the first thing I started doing was started reading labels of what is in food, and going to culinary school. I knew how to
Did they
make.
teach you like what the labels were and like all the like
Oh yeah, you went.
scientific
We had
terms and stuff?
Well, there was probably, and this kind of ties into doctors too. With chefs, we didn't learn that much about nutrition. I went through I went through actually I was a chef's apprentice in the American Culinary Federation. It was a 4-year apprenticeship program, and I think we probably spent 2 semesters on nutrition. We didn't spend very much.
I
hardly.
don't think that doctors even get 2
No, well, I
semesters,
know
though.
I know some doctors. They have, they're 7 to 10 years, I think, to get fully vested as a doctor. And I think I've had several doctors tell me they've had 1 class on nutrition.
Yeah.
And that's a stumbling block for me with my oncologist. So my cancer, that's October 28th, 2015 is a totally turning point in my life. It's like you're on one path and God says, okay, here you are. We're going to go this way now. And it totally changes everything. Changes your priorities, changes everything. And it starts realizing that, and it goes back to the sacrament of the present moment. And we have no control over anything. You just get told that you have incurable cancer and you got basically 7 years to live. You start living your life differently. So I never believed in the 7-year thing. I was like, okay, that's just not right. And as I did more research, there's reasons that it's 7 years. And they wanted to start chemotherapy on me right away in 2015. And God put this other guy in my life that said, maybe we're not going to do chemotherapy. And this other guy in my life was a guy I worked with 20 years before that had been diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer.
Whoa.
And he called me out of the blue. He found out that I had cancer. He says, hey, let's go meet at the Boise Co-op for a juice. And I said, a juice? What do you mean a juice? I was like, what's a juice? And he says, just meet me on there. So I go over there, and he gives me buys this green drink juice, and we're sitting there, and I'm talking to him.
Grass, whatever
barley grass, and I don't remember what it originally was.
Yeah.
But he says, I just want to tell you my story. And I said, okay, tell me your story. And this is early 2016, like January of 2016. And he says, well, I had a grapefruit-sized tumor in my belly.
Tumor.
Yeah. So they removed it, and they wanted to do chemo on me. Says, and I didn't know any difference, so they did chemo to, residual around, and he was cancer-free. 18 months later, he starts feeling pain in his belly again, goes in, and they say, you have stage 4 liver cancer, tumors inside and out of his liver. And they said, you've basically got 3 months, and we need to start chemo right away. And he says, I'm not doing chemo again. He goes, you're telling me I got 3 months to live. I'm not doing it. So he goes to Sun Valley and finds this naturopath doctor. Mm-hmm. So this story he's telling me, they give him 3 months to live, was 7 years after they told him he had 3 months to live. He cured his stage 4 liver cancer naturally. And
was it just with food, or did
with
they
food.
do other things?
Food and natural IVs you can get, which I've learned a lot, and I'm coming up on 10 years of getting diagnosed in October. But I really, there's a whole nother world of natural foods out there that you don't really realize. So I became carrot juice, celery juice. I've drank one bunch of celery juice every day for the last 10 years almost.
Wow.
And I found out that celery is a wonderful for your gut. Starts everything starts in your gut. Yes. Nutrition wise. Yeah. Whatever you put in there, your gut's going to go, okay, this is good stuff or bad stuff. Yeah. And celery, natural diuretic, so it gets your poop going right in the morning. You drink it first thing in the morning, you let it, and it just invigorates your body. And I cannot not drink celery juice.
Okay, I have questions.
Yeah.
So this is not about like cancer or anything, but my daughter really struggles with eczema. So we've been really trying to figure out like what's going on in her gut biome to see, because they say your skin is like an exterior of your gut, right? So all of this. So when I'm thinking of celery juice, are you just drinking celery juice by itself, or how are you making it into a smoothie, or like?
I drink the juice straight.
Mm-hmm.
My wife thinks it's a little too bitter,
mm-hmm.
salty, because celery has natural salts in it. She adds a little apple to it, sweetens it up.
Yeah.
But there's a thing about juicing that you need to know. So the reason you want, and it's called the raw food
mm-hmm.
diet, I guess you want to say, carrot juice, celery juice, vegetables, spinach, kale, whatever you want to make a juice out of. It has enzymes in it that is what heal you. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the problem is, and I'm not trying to knock any juice company or anything in Boise or the world or whatever. It's all you get nutritive value out of it.
But don't they pasteurize stuff like that if you buy it wholesale?
Well, there's like a juice company in Boise that you don't do that. You can buy it. Yeah, the juices that you see in the Albertsons and your grocery stores. Yeah,
which kills everything.
Yeah,
right.
Kills everything. So the enzymes only are alive, like the vegetable's alive. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you juice it, it starts the dying process. So the enzymes only last and it depends on what kind of juicer you have. And I learned that right off the bat. There's two different kinds of juicers. There's the high-speed juicers, which like those Ninja blenders, mm-hmm. and what that does is that introduces heat. Mm-hmm. And heat mm-hmm. kills enzymes. Mm-hmm. And then also oxygen kills enzymes. So you get these high-speed, it kills them within 3 or 4 hours. So you're still getting some nutrition. Nutrition. You get nutrition from the vegetables, but you're not getting the enzyme, which is the healing part, because they die. So there's a juicer called a masticating juicer, or a slow juicer or masticating, and it grinds it very slow, doesn't introduce heat, and the enzymes stay alive for 72 hours, 3 days. Wow. So I make celery juice for 3 days. I just bought mason jars and I juice 3 days worth, and I do the same with carrot juice. Now, carrot juice, I started reading recipes for carrot juice. Your body is under oxidative stress constantly because we're putting, it's called free radicals. You put stuff on your body, and it causes inflammation, and just doesn't make you feel good. And we don't really know why that's happening. It's because of what we're putting in our body. And going back to reading labels again, it's like as a chef, I learned how to make mayonnaise from scratch.
Right.
Mayonnaise doesn't have sugar in it.
Right.
There's no sugar in mayonnaise.
Yeah.
But you go read any label on any mayonnaise jar, that's the second
sugar.
ingredient is sugar. It's because it's an addictive. And the food companies a long time ago, in probably the 50s, 60s, realized, or even earlier than that, probably the 30s and 40s, realized that put sugar in everything. Ketchup didn't have sugar in it.
Yeah.
Does now and now they turn it to high fructose corn syrup, which is a highly processed sugar, which it kills you. It's inflammation, and that's how our bodies get inflamed.
So when you changed your diet, did you go to a low inflammation diet then?
Oh yeah.
So we're cutting out sugars and processed food. Was it more like a paleo diet, or were you even more intense, like a?
When I really, this caused some arguments in my family too, because I went down to even.
It's hard. I will say, so my daughter, like I said, we're trying to figure out what's going on. And we go to kind of like a pretty strict, like paleo kind of candida, I think is how you say it, diet, which cuts out a lot of like starches and stuff as well, because those turn into
sugars. Yep.
So it's so hard to plan food.
Very hard.
It's so hard. And I'm planning for 2 children that are under 3 and my husband and I. So it's like, it's really hard to plan that.
Is this something new, or has this been going on a while?
With her, it's probably like a year. So she started just before her first birthday. She started having a big eczema breakout. It was just like 2 small patches, and we did some steroid topical, and I think she was allergic to the steroid, and it just spread her whole body.
Okay.
And so we've been kind of like trying a lot of things. They have a lot of protocols that there are for it. A lot of them is cutting out seed oils, cutting out sugar, cutting out gluten, cutting out dairy, cutting out eggs, cutting out like peanuts, like cutting out all the allergens.
Yeah.
And
seed oils are a big deal.
Yeah, we haven't touched, even before she had this, we've been out of seed oils.
Well, the seed oils are in lots of processed food that you don't think about.
We cook mostly from scratch.
Good.
So
good.
even snacks and stuff. There are a couple of things that we buy for snack wise, but especially for like the last month, we've definitely been like snacks are like veggies and just really trying to be low inflammation to see if we can like cut it out.
Very important. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so when you're talking about like your diet, was it more of like a really strict like veggie protein?
Very strict. Yeah. Fish once a week, no meat. Berries? I got rid of meat. Lots of berries.
Okay.
But
no bananas probably. Or something
yeah, bananas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You just got to watch sugar. I mean,
right.
Everything to it. I mean, natural. Get rid of sugars, but you can still eat fruit with sugars. Like I would eat fibrous fruits, like oranges, grapefruits, or good fibrous fruits that your body knows what to do with, and even watermelon is good for you. So it's just you don't just sit here and just pound all that stuff down.
Right.
You do it in moderation, but it's as long as it's natural. And the other thing is the organic part. People are afraid to buy organic because it's starting more expensive. But the pesticides on regular fruit, I mean, you really got to wash the heck out of these fruits. You got to wash everything. And people don't even wash. Like you get a basket of berries. Like I challenge you to go buy a pint of organic blueberries and a regular pint of blueberries. Put them in the fridge.
Which ones
within 1 or 2 days, those blueberries, the organic ones, are going to start mold. The other ones will last for weeks.
Yeah.
And you're going, no, that's not natural.
That was another thing is like I started making bread a while, like probably like 3 years ago, and my bread would mold. And I'd be like, this is kind of disgusting. I have this bread that I bought from the store and it's not molding.
Right.
Like it's kind of gross when you think about that stuff.
It's all the chemicals and everything they put in it, and it's sad. It's that we have to really educate ourselves on what we're eating.
Right.
And I immediately lost 15 pounds when in 2015.
Yeah.
I mean, I got lean and mean. Cancer just sat at bay for 8 years. Nothing.
Didn't do anything.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And then in June of 2022, I wasn't feeling very good, and I went in, and did a CAT scan, and my cancer had exploded.
Oh.
I went to stage 4, and it was everywhere, all over my abdomen, my pelvic area, my chest, everywhere.
Were you living any different?
No, I think it was COVID. I got COVID real bad in October of 21, and spent 15 days in the hospital. So my immune system was pretty
low.
Challenged. Yeah. And I hadn't felt right. I mean, I was bad. I was on 24-hour oxygen for 2 months.
Yeah.
And I never really, I think there was a month probably from February to March where I felt okay. And then did not feel right. So in June, I got a CAT scan, and of course they said your cancer just exploded, and they wanted to start chemo right away. And again, my brain went back to my friend 9 years earlier saying he wouldn't do chemo. And then the chemo that I was going to be getting was called bendamustine. So I had a good friend as a doctor. I said, what is bendamustine? I need to know what it is, what I'm putting in my body. And he said, well, the mustine is mustard gas. I went, what? And he said, and I've been challenged by this on other doctors, but if you really do the research, it's mustard gas in the 1950s.
Oh my God.
They haven't changed it. Yeah, bendamustine. And it's a combination of immunodrugs, and they've made it so your body can accept it, but basically you're killing yourself. And that's basically what this doctor told me. He says that we bring you to the brink of death, and then we bring you back again. Because people think that chemotherapy
does it just kill? So
it kills everything. It doesn't just kill the cancer; it kills everything.
Yeah, and so you're just building yourself. I mean, I feel like it almost feels like, how they used to like bleed you, like get you most of your blood out of your body to like. It almost sounds kind of like that in my head a little bit. But at the same time, it's not something like, there are reasons why people do this, right? And it has helped people. So like we'll start there, but it does seem kind of intense to think about your whole body, all your cells dying.
Well, after he told me that we basically bring you to the brink of death, I was like, there's no way in hell I'm doing chemo. So I told my oncologist that. I said, he goes, you got to face the reality that you're going to have to get treatment. I said, okay. So I had a naturopath doctor that I had been seeing to go get IV treatment, which is natural stuff like vitamin C IV, which vitamin C is a huge antioxidant. So when you flood yourself with vitamin C, it helps inflammation, it helps everything, it makes you feel better. So I had been doing that periodically for years, and a lot of other IVs too. I could go on a whole list, but all natural stuff, no chemicals. So I said, just give me 3 months.
No synthetics.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I said, give me 3 months. And he goes, well, I'm going to give you till November. And
when was this?
This was, June was when I got the CAT scan, and I saw him in August. So August, he's telling me you got a.
Of 24?
Of 22.
22.
August of 22. So I said, just give me a couple months to do it naturally. He goes, I'll give you till November. We're doing the CAT scan in November. And he said, if it's bad, you're going to have to face this treatment. I said, okay. And my wife was in agreement. I said, okay, if we don't see any progress, we'll have to go to the chemo. So, and that was last resort. So I went to my naturopath. He got me on a different regimen, and changed my diet again to more, I started discovering all these teas and these tree barks and all this natural stuff that helps kill cancer and had anti-cancer properties, and specific to lymphoma, my blood cancer. And so I bought these tree barks. I started making all these different kind of teas, like birch bark tea, cashew bark tree, this Palperina from the Amazon rainforest. I mean, all these different barks. And I started drinking these teas every day. Plus, I did about 10 other things that my naturopath doctor said, you need to start doing this right away, which also some supplements that I was taking. So I go back in November for a CAT scan. And, the great thing about my charge, you can get your report before you see your oncologist. So I get my report, and I'm reading the radiology report, and the first thing the radiology report says, this patient is responding extremely well to treatment.
And you're like, I'm not doing treatment.
And my cancer was pretty much gone.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Again.
So
wow.
then I go into my oncologist the next week, and he's just sitting there looking at his computer screen. I'm sitting over in the chair. And he looks at me and he goes, he thinks you're doing chemo. the radiologist thought I'd been doing chemo. I said, nope. And he goes, so then he says, well, what have you been doing? He goes, and he holds up his hand like this. And I said, what's that? He goes, that's how many times in my 35 years I've seen this happen. Like your cancer goes away.
Yeah.
And so he asked me what I'm doing. So I start telling him what I'm doing, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah,
he just dismissed
like,
me. He's like, you're a quack. That doesn't make sense. And and the thing about when you're oncology, they've got a stenographer in there. They're recording everything she's typing everything you're saying in there.
Yeah.
And I looked at her twice and I said, hey, the number one thing here is prayer. I said, I got a bunch of people praying for me, and prayer is number one. I realize I have no control over this, but God has given me these tools, and I try to explain to them. Of course, they didn't write any of that in the no prayer. Well, so anyway, that bought me time, right? Because he says, well, you're good to go. I said, we're not talking about treatment. And he goes, everything had gotten better. And so for 2 years, I was great, right? So this past year, in August of 2024, I gained like 15 pounds. And I'm thinking, what is, I thought, when you heal yourself, when you get healed like that, you let your dander down a little bit. And I kind of quit I kind of fell off the wagon, and I was not eating like I'd been. I went back to old habits, quit drinking the teas. I mean, I was just a lot of stuff. Come great, no problem. So in August of 2024, I gained all this weight all of a sudden, and I was out of breath a lot, and I didn't really understand what's going on. And then September, I couldn't breathe, and I go in and get a CAT scan. Well, no, this is what happened. My lungs collapsed. I didn't know my lungs collapsed. I just went to church one morning to work, and I was like, I couldn't breathe. So I called my naturopath. I said, I can't breathe. He says, you need to go to the emergency room. So I go to the emergency room, find out that both my lungs had collapsed, and they pulled off 2 liters of fluid off my left lung and 1.5 liters off my right lung. And they did a CAT scan, and they come back and they say, hey, we got bad news. He goes, your cancer is spread everywhere. I mean, it was like everywhere. Yeah. And I went, okay. So same story. I go back to my oncologist, and he says, we need to start chemo, because your cancer is big. It's worse than it was in 2022. Yeah. I said, just give me 3 months. I said, I'm going to go back and get realigned.
This is really interesting though. So each time it was in the fall.
That's kind of strange. Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, that is strange. And you said roughly around the same time, like August, September.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
That's really, that's just interesting to me.
That is strange. Yeah.
Yes,
I'm going to have to go back and do a little timeline and find out what happened here. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's okay. So he was pretty emphatic saying, and he put that in the note saying, patients denying treatment. And he said, we need to do treatment. Mm-hmm. So I go like 3 more weeks. My lungs collapsed again, and I couldn't sleep. It was just terrible. And I kept gaining weight. Yeah. I was like 25 pounds overweight. So, going to the hospital again because I couldn't breathe, and they admitted me and said, your cancer has gone up 75% in 3 weeks. My cancer had grown 75%. Wow. So it basically had morphed from this slow-growing indolent lymphoma into this fast-growing aggressive lymphoma. Yeah. So it kind of morphed. So he admitted me and says, you don't have any choice. We're starting chemo in 2 days. And I'm like, I felt like I was going to die. So luckily they didn't do the bendamustine. He said, this cancer has really turned into an aggressive cancer. So he did this other chemo, which is called R-CHOP, which is an immunotherapy drug, and then 3 different types of chemo, or 4 different types of chemo. So the R was for Rituxan, which is an immunotherapy drug. Okay. And the CHOP was for 3 different types of chemo. The P was for prednisone, which is a steroid drug. So I start reading. And I've got 1 day to think about this. And so I start reading an R-CHOP, and it's nasty. It's a nasty chemo. I mean, it's just nasty. So I'm thinking, this is not good. And they warned me about all the side effects, and that you're going to have fatigue real bad. You're going to lose weight. Your blood counts are going to go to nothing. Mm-hmm. And, plan on really being out of it for 3 or 4 months. And so it's basically a 6-month treatment, 5.5 month treatment. And I said, okay, well, I got to do it, right? So first treatment, I get in the hospital because they admitted me, and I get the treatment, and I was scared to death. I've got a port up, and they put a port up, which I never in my life thought I would have. So the first treatment was real hard because your body is getting this, and my body was rejecting it. So it was real difficult. But treatments 2, 3, 4, and 5 went like a breeze, right? And because treatment 1, I was so sick.
Hard.
I was very sick, and my mind wasn't in the right place. So called my naturopath doctor. I said, "Hey, I don't feel good. This is not feeling good." So he says, "We need to get in here and start getting you IV." So he got me on an IV set, these natural IVs. And I had been on, when I got out of the hospital after treatment 1, I was on 24-hour oxygen. I couldn't breathe. So for a week and a half, I was on oxygen every day. I hardly went to work because I was just not feeling good. Go into my naturopath doctor, I get IVs of vitamin C and another thing called UBI, which is where they take blood out of your arm, about 55 cc's of blood, put it through, add ozone to it, which is a purifier, and they put it back in you. So it's cleaning my blood. And I did that twice a week. After the second treatment, I was off oxygen. And I started feeling good. I had lost 44 pounds after that first treatment.
That's insane.
I looked like a Holocaust.
Much.
Yeah, it's crazy. People were shocked when they saw me. They're like, what happened to you? Because I did look like death, warmed over. And so I started getting these treatments in between chemo, gained all my weight back, never got any fatigue, nothing. And my naturopath put me on some separate supplements. And you got to really watch it with these chemo drugs because of the combination. If you're doing natural stuff, it could quell out and actually cause more problems. So I had to really watch what I was doing.
Were you working with both your naturopath and your oncologist like together? Were they like in contact?
No, they were not in contact.
But you at least they could look at each other, like what was going on both sides? No.
We're not going to go there.
Okay.
I kind of went undercover with the naturopath.
Okay.
I love my oncologist, and the care that I got was fantastic, but they're just not into believing the naturopath way at all. And of course, I'm a research guy, so I went back and made sure that what I was doing naturally did not problematically cause issues with the chemo. So, so after the third treatment, got a CAT scan, and my oncologist is like baffled at my blood counts, saying your blood counts are like almost normal. What is going? He was baffled because he was just so happy that I'm getting this poison put in me, and my blood counts aren't going bad, and I haven't lost weight, and I don't have fatigue. I have no side effects, and there's a big long list of side effects. And actually, one of the chemos they give me is called devil juice. I'm sitting in the chair, and this big red bag is getting administered to me, and she says, "Well, it's time for the devil juice." I said, "Hey, I'm a deacon. You can put devil juice in me." I said, "Call it Kool-Aid or something." So it was pretty toxic stuff that they're putting, because like I say, it kills everything. So after the third treatment, I went and got a CAT scan. All the cancer had disappeared except for one in the center of my abdomen here. Had a 15 by 14 centimeter tumor mass in my abdomen, and it shrunk to 3 by 4. So almost 70% gone. And that was in December of this year, of 2024. So I got 3 more treatments after that. My last treatment was just a week ago Thursday. I can't say it was easy. It was, when you're in the middle of the battle, you're not thinking. You always hear about the chemo chemo's nasty. So, but in this aspect, I accepted the fact that I needed to get chemo, but you can use complementary stuff to help you get through. Right. You don't have to suffer through all the side effects. I have a good friend who went through exactly the same thing a year ago, and he went through hell, but he wasn't doing any of the natural stuff. Yeah. And I went through the natural stuff. So I breezed through the chemos, other than the last one. The last one kind of got me. It took me about 5 to 10 days to get through it. I barely started feeling normal now. But because 6 rounds of intensive chemotherapy tend to take a toll on your body.
Right.
But I feel fine. I haven't had any fatigue. I've got a PET scan next Thursday, so we'll see what happens. And hopefully it'll be clear. I don't feel like I have cancer anymore, but I'm continuing to see my naturopath doctor. And my whole point here is that you can use both in a complementary fashion.
Yeah.
You don't have to just have one or the other. And, the first time in 2022, I went through it all naturally and got rid of it. But it just didn't work this time because I slipped and I wasn't really doing what I was supposed to be doing. But I'm on board now, and obviously God has directed me. And I've helped. When you get cancer, you fall into a network of meeting. God sent so many people to me with cancer, and I've got a whole network of friends now with cancer. And then we're all in the same boat. I got friends all over the country that we text every day and pray and bounce ideas off each other and. What works for you and what doesn't work. So there's a place for natural medicine in this whole gamut of treatment for cancer, because it's cancer's nasty. I mean, everybody knows somebody that has cancer. Everybody does, and it's ripped families apart, and it's destroyed families, and it doesn't have to. Obviously, there's some cancers that are just not treatable, and luckily I've been blessed, and I just think God's called me to share, and like I say, I'm not knocking Western medicine, but there's obviously natural stuff you can do.
So the two questions I have off of this is, obviously the last 5 years have been crazy, to say the least.
Yeah.
So in two ways, so I have two questions. You can answer them in whatever order you want, but what was the things that helped you the most spiritually? What kind of practices or readings or that kind of stuff, prayers, mass, what kind of things helped you the most spiritually to get through this time? And then what were the kind of things nutritionally that you think were the most beneficial just overall for your health?
Okay. Well, spiritually, realizing that it taught me a lot about trusting God, and that He's got a plan for you, and talking to God more every day. I mean, I talk to God all day long, every day, at nighttime. I mean, I make that the first thing I do in the morning is talk to God, and the last thing I do at night is I'm talking to God. I analyze the day, how it went, and then just reading the scriptures and just realizing that this, before you really go through any suffering, you really don't understand what redemptive suffering is, and you don't understand suffering. And that's what I love about the Catholic Church is suffering's a big deal of it. I mean, we're how many people suffer and all of a sudden they discover God? They go through their lives, and that's a pretty used statement. They suffer. You start praying a lot, or you realizing that you're not in control of things and you've got to rely on somebody else. So I realized that, my study of the scriptures really have helped me a lot. Because in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the law and the Spirit was outside the realm. It wasn't in people. It was outside. Everything was done outside, outwardly. The rituals were done outwardly. The sacrificial aspect was done outwardly. The 10 Commandments were written. And if you read Jeremiah, it says, I'm going to establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. I will put my spirit within them. I will put my law in their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So it's inside of us. And what does that mean? And as a Catholic, it means, what did Jesus, the word covenant is a big deal. And the word testament, that word means covenant. So we have Old Testament, New Testament, Old Covenant, New Covenant. So I really, from my study of the Old Testament, of how everything was done outwardly, the priest would grab the animal's blood and put it on the altar, and he would splash it on the altar, and he would splash it on the people, and that was the signified of God and the unity of the people. That was the outwardly sacrifice. And we look at the Passover meal of how the blood on the doorpost and the hyssop branch and all this stuff. Well, it's right there in the New Testament too. What's the only time Jesus used the word covenant in the New Testament? The only time he said at the Last Supper, "This is the blood. This is the covenant in my blood." He says, inside of my blood. The covenant is the new covenant is inside, not outside. So when that it's applied in your life, especially when you're suffering and realizing that Jesus, it wasn't just some fake thing that happened, that Jesus suffered and died on a cross.
Yeah.
It's just like I was talking about earlier, you must pick up your cross daily and follow me, and you must deny yourself. And when you get caught with a disease or you suffer and you unite that with the cross, it's like Romans 12, you offer your body as a living sacrifice and realize that life is not a bowl of cherries. It's you've got to suffer and follow the lives of the saints. All that study that I'd done for 10, 15 years gets applied in your life when something like this happens. And that's what gets you through every day, is realize that Jesus gave us a model to follow. And what is that model? What is that model? That model is that, we hear a lot about the health and wealth gospel, that, everything's peachy keen and it's great.
Yeah.
And that's not the gospel. The whole point of the gospel is Jesus Christ sharing his life with us. It's just, I reference Scott Hahn a lot because he was instrumental in me when I came back to the church. He was a new Catholic.
Yeah.
I think he converted in 1988 or 87. At any rate, I studied a lot with him. So he brought up the point of a woman giving birth. So you give birth and you say, "Oh, it's done." No, it's not done. It's just beginning, right? Or you go through college and you go to what? You go to commencement exercises. It's called commencement for a reason. You're starting a new life. And Jesus gave us his life. He gave us a model to follow. And the whole point of the gospel is Jesus Christ sharing his life with us. He's reproducing his life in us. And it's not just all the good stuff. It's the bad stuff too. He had a rough life the last 3 years, especially, of suffering. And we're all going to suffer at some point in our life, and we unite that. So as we go through our lives, uniting that suffering to the cross gets us around a lot of things. That's why I have a crucifix everywhere I can look at, anywhere I'm at, in my truck, in both my offices, at home, everywhere there's that cross, because I go back to a quote that Saint Bonaventure said to Thomas Aquinas. Now, those two were kind of adversaries in the 1200s. I think they lived in the 1200s. But, we look at Thomas Aquinas, brilliant man, and we look at St. Bonaventure. And Thomas Aquinas said, to ask Bonaventure, he says, "How did you come up with such exquisite, beautiful writings? And all your teachings are just fantastic." And Bonaventure looked at Aquinas and says, "Everything that I've learned in my life has been done meditating on a crucifix." Everything he's learned in his life is done. And that stuck with me. I learned that 25 years ago. So when I look at a crucifix, I think of Bonaventure saying, everything I've learned in my life has come from meditating on a crucifix. So when you look at life that way, when bad things happen, meditate on the crucifix. When your mind starts wandering at Mass, meditate on the crucifix. Go back to the realizing that we're there. We are there to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice to God. I go back to Isaiah 6 again. Those coals, the embers that put on. Saint Cyril of Jerusalem in the 250 A.D. commented on Isaiah 6, the call of Isaiah, and he said, those coals that put on your lip is Jesus Christ. So I cannot get that image out of my brain, is that every time I go to communion, I meditate on Isaiah 6. I meditate that I am a man of unclean lips. I'm among a people of unclean lips. Woe to me, I'm doomed. And then all of a sudden I go up and receive communion, that coal burns on my lips and I'm clean. Yeah. And that vision has stuck at every Mass. I learned that passage eons ago, but it stuck with me. It makes me appreciate what's going on at Mass. We have a heavenly liturgy going on, and we think Mass is boring, and it just cracks me up. And when somebody says Mass is boring, I just look at them and say, "You're boring. You have no idea what's going on at Mass." I mean, what's going on, and it's my call to explain to people what's going on at Mass, because it is really it would be the central, should be the highlight of our week, every week, our daily Mass or whatever, when we're receiving the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Do we really believe that? And if you read Scripture, you realize that it's all put together, and that new covenant is the Eucharist. That new covenant is the Eucharist. I mean, Scott Hahn, many authors have written books that is the new covenant, is the Lord's Supper. And as a Catholic, we should be cherishing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, do you want to end us in a prayer?
Sure. Okay. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we come to you as beggars, and understanding that you are the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and it should be of our lives, not just reading about you, but letting you live within us, and let the Holy Spirit dwell in us, because we were bought at a great price, and therefore we should glorify you and boast of you in our body. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Desert Wanderers. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up as well as subscribe down below. We're produced by Salt and Light Radio, so you can find us on social platforms at Salt and Light Radio or Desert Wanderers Podcast. We produce episodes every week and we launch them for you on Wednesdays. So make sure to tune in for next week's episode, and we'll see you then.